Let's talk to God. One more thing, like, subscribe, and share. Come on, let's talk to God. Woo!
Well, good evening, everybody. Hey, it's Cutler here in the Let's Talk with Cutler broadcast. It's our time of sharing. It's our time to get here and share these 1,800 seconds. And I'm so glad for this time and this space. So let me just say off the bat, thank you for those of you who have been with me for a while. Those of you who have been with me for the long haul. I definitely appreciate it. I appreciate the time that you take to invite me into whatever space you allow me to come on these Tuesdays and Thursdays for this 1,800 seconds. And if people are just riding by this channel, let me just say this channel is all about motivation. It's about inspiration. It's about encouragement. It's about challenging ourselves to show up a little bit better tomorrow than we did today. It's about making sure that when I showed up today, I showed up a little bit stronger than I did yesterday. Just those kinds of things. We have so much negativity and everything out there in the world, but this is a time for us to come together. And it's what I call a positive moment, and just do some reflection and some introspection and some just looking at ourselves and say, collectively, how can we learn something from today? Is there a lesson that I can learn today that will encourage me and even challenge me to show up a little bit better tomorrow than I did today? The answer is yes. And so I want to thank you all for always sharing and being so kind and gracious about sharing your space. So if this is your first time, please make sure that you stop by, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to let you know whenever I've gone live and whenever I've uploaded new content, that sort of thing. And then as you come into the chat, I trust that you will do a thumbs up on the conversation, because we're talking about real situations, real life, real people, real circumstances, and real things that affect us in our everyday living. And of course, what I'd like to do, I'm going to shout out the LTTC VIPs, those people who just jumped into the chat, because I have something near and dear to my heart that I want to talk about today. But I want to shout out those people who jumped into the chat. I call you the LTTC VIPs, and you are the first 3 people who jumped in the chat today. Now, listen, you all, while I am acknowledging the LTTC VIPs, do me a favor. If you know someone who's dealing with guilt, if you know someone who's handling grief, if you know someone who's wrestling with this whole notion of shoulda, coulda, woulda, do me a favor within the next 30 to 60 seconds, invite them to come on and participate in this conversation. If you know anybody who's dealing with guilt, who's dealing with grief, who's dealing with self-imposed guilt or any of that, dealing with the whole notion of shoulda, coulda, woulda, invite them for these 1,800 seconds to come in and participate in this conversation. I trust that we have something to share with them that will be a source of strength, that will be a source of motivation, that will be a source of reflection and challenging us to say, here is now what I know that I didn't necessarily know. Here's now what I can focus on that I didn't know that I could focus on before. This is a conversation that, once again, is going to come from the heart. So I want to acknowledge the VIPs for this evening. Everybody's important, but it's just the people who raced into the chat first, and they are, let's see who they are. Annie Cutler says, get aboard, let's ride. We're going to tonight, we do have something to talk about, and we are on the ride to the highway, along the highway of life, getting better. And I hope by the time we finish this conversation, we will say, you know what, I'm glad I got on board tonight. I'm glad I got aboard. I'm glad I made it for this ride. So thank you so much, Mom Annie Cutler, for just hopping into the chat room this evening. And then to our good friend, MV, who says, hello, everyone. Hello to you, our friend. Thank you again for making it into the chat. You're one of the VIPs this evening. And then rounding up third place, Paula D. Hello to you, our friend Paula. Hello to you. So thank you also for making it into the chat so quickly. And hello to your mom. All right. So everybody else, again, this conversation is going to be about how to handle the coulda, woulda, and shouldas that we sometimes encounter in life. How do we handle those moments of guilt? How do we handle those moments of regret? How do we handle those moments of grief and mourning and all of those things. And Cutler, what is the impetus of the conversation? What sparked this conversation? What happened that you wanted to talk about this? I was just reflecting. I know that some of us are dealing with grief, some of us are dealing with death, some of us are dealing with loss, some of us are still in bereavement. And I was also thinking, in the scope of all of that, I was thinking about a friend who not too long ago lost his son. And in dealing with him and in talking to him, one of the biggest pieces of processing it all was, I just wish I could have done something differently, or maybe I should have done this. And then I'm aware of another friend who was on vacation and her mother died. And she said, here I am, I'm on vacation. And while I'm on vacationing, my mother dies while on vacation. And it was that whole thing of, should I have not gone on vacation? Should I have cut my vacation short? What could I have done? And then another situation where I know of a son who said to his mom, I'll see you next weekend. And before next weekend could come, the mother passed, and he never got a chance to see her after walking out of the door that weekend. These are real situations, you all. I wonder how many of us would be gracious enough to say, Cole, I've had some of those situations, or I know people in those situations. How about this? A husband who did not insist that his wife receive a certain kind of treatment after she had already said no 3 times. And he said, I wish I just would have made her. I wish I would have made her. The son who said to his mom, I'll see you next weekend. I wish I just would have went earlier. The friend who was on vacation and her mother died. If I had to do it all over again, I just could have cut my vacation short. The friend who lost his son, who says, listen, I'm sure there's some things I could have done and I would have done and I should have done. So we live with this, what I call this self-imposed guilt sometimes. And we live this whole notion of shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I have to say this, y'all, it does not matter the brevity of life. It doesn't matter how short a person's life may have been, because by the same token, there are some people who have relatives and friends and loved ones who have lived for a long time. I mean, into their 90s, 80s, 90s, and even over 100. And still, people will still live with this whole notion of what I coulda, shoulda, and woulda done. Do I have anybody who will be real enough to say, Cole, I've heard of those experiences. Even if I haven't experienced them myself, I've heard about them. And so while we're dealing with those kinds of things, that's sometimes what I call guilt. And it's not always that other people put it on us. But many times we impose it on ourselves. And now, once I put the burden on my own shoulders, guess what? When I put the burden on my own shoulders, there's nobody who was there to dare lift it off my shoulders, because I placed it there. I put it there. And nobody's going to come by and take away something that they didn't impose. And so now I have to deal with it. I'm left to deal with it myself. So Cutler, what would you suggest? Do you have any experiences that you can share? I'm telling you all, this is just about some experiences that I know, that I've been through, that I'm aware of. It makes us stop, and before we can get to how do we handle the coulda and shoulda and woulda, it makes us stop to say, well, listen, why do we even deal with it in the first place? I'll tell you why we deal with it, you all. We deal with it because because we feel like we did something wrong. Why do we deal with guilt? Whether it's imposed by ourselves or by somebody else, why do we deal with the guilt in the first place? Because we feel like we did something wrong. I left the thing in the floor, and if I hadn't left the thing in the floor, they would have tripped and broke their leg. I did something wrong. Or this whole notion of survivor's remorse. I was in the car with her, but we got in a car accident. She died and I lived. Must have done something wrong. I didn't get to the hospital in time, and because I didn't get to we feel like we did something wrong. And I have to ask us, y'all, wrong. Thank you, Envy, for sharing. She says, my grandfather passed while I was out of town. And a lot of times it's just those sorts of things. And then we deal with, could I have gotten there? Should I have tried to get there a lot faster? A lot of times we feel like we did something wrong. But may I ask you this, you are wrong by whose standards? I'm only here 1800 seconds, but let me say, wrong by whose standards? I feel like I did something wrong, but wrong by whose standards? Many of you all know that I went to law school and that I've taught law. There's this concept in law, and in this concept in law, we call it, you have to look at the fancy word that says the totality of the circumstances. Total circumstances. What does it mean, Color? It means that you just got to look at the whole picture. I feel like I did something wrong. Wrong by whose standards? Look at the totality of the circumstances. Look at the whole picture. Who's standing in your shoes to tell you that you did something wrong? Who has your perspective? No one but you. So when we think we've done something wrong, the word wrong is subjective. May I say this? Don't be imprisoned by what anyone else think is wrong. Don't be imprisoned by what somebody else thinks is wrong when they have not stood in your shoes. When someone does not see the picture from your perspective, when they don't see the situation from your angle. Wrong by whose standards? And I can say this out of my own experience. Out of my own experience. I don't have to talk about anybody else's experience. Can I tell you that sometimes when you are grieving, the truth of the matter is you're just as irrational as you can be. Do I have, a preacher would say, do I have any witnesses? Can I get an amen? But it is true, you all. Many times when we are grieving, we are irrational. And in one of my books, I wrote, whenever you're experiencing a high or low emotion, don't make any more decisions than you have to make. I know, of course, in the death and the grieving process, there are times that you have to make funeral arrangements and all that kind of stuff. But I say to people, listen, when you are grieving, you're irrational. You don't think like you normally think. You don't function like you normally function. You don't operate like you normally operate. You don't be how you normally be when you're dealing with a high or low emotion such as grief. So I say to people, don't make any more decisions than you have to make while you're grieving. Because grieving and grief can be so consuming. That's why we deal with the whole coulda, shoulda, woulda, because we feel like we did something wrong. Another reason why we deal with the whole coulda, shoulda, woulda, why we deal with it is because we like order. We like to be in control. We like to know that things are operating in a certain manner, in a certain way. Cutler, why would you say that? Because ordinarily, when something bad happens, think about it. We can usually trace it back to someone having done something. Something bad occurs, something bad happens. We can usually trace it or track it back to it happened because so and so did such and such. But when we cannot trace a particular outcome to a root cause, we don't like that, because it means we have to accept that things happen that we just cannot understand. If I can't trace it back to a root cause, it means that I have to accept the fact that I am not always in control. If I can't track it back to something that somebody did, it means that we have to accept the fact that life is sometimes unpredictable, but we like order. And if I can't track it back to somebody having done something, it means that we have to accept the fact that life is sometimes chaotic. If I can't trace or track it back to somebody having done something, it means that we have to accept the fact that life is sometimes just life. We like order. We like the fact that 1 + 2 = 3. But when I got 1 and 2 and I end up with a 5, what happened? Something is chaotic, something is out of control, something is out of order, and we like order. And so if I can place all the pieces, all the couldas, shouldas, and wouldas on a board and try to put a puzzle together, then I can see the order. But when there is no order, what do? That's why we deal with all the couldas, the shouldas, and wouldas, because we like order. One, then, because we feel like we did something wrong. 2, because we like order. So how do we process this? How do I deal, Cutler, with the couldas and the shouldas and wouldas? How do I process this load that I'm carrying, this weight that I'm bearing? How do I process this guilt? I can tell you the first thing that comes from my experience is this. Don't let other people dictate what your experience should look like. Just don't. How do you process the couldas, shouldas, and wouldas? What you experience does not have to look like what somebody else experienced. With all due respect to my father's passing, I may have friends who in the future or colleagues in the future whose father may pass, but I cannot dictate to them what their experience should look like. I can only tell them what mine did look like. So don't let other people dictate what your experience should look like. Because I've learned if there are no rules for some things in death, there are no rules. In processing grief, there are no rules. There's no template for how things should happen. There's no template, no cookie cutter for how you should process your emotions. Absolutely not. Don't let other people dictate what your experience should look like. And again, I'm not coming as a clinician. I'm just talking about my life and my life's experiences. How else would I suggest that we process this sometimes self-imposed guilt, or how would I suggest that we process and handle the coulda, shouldas, and wouldas in life? Here's one other thing: self-examine. Do your own examination, but be careful that you do it in love. Nobody has to process what I'm going through. I appreciate it, but I have to learn to do my own self-examination, so that I'm handling the guilt. I have to ask myself, what would I say to someone else in the same situation? And whatever it is that you would say to somebody else in the same situation, remember this particular step I say is called self-examine in love. Whatever you would say to someone else in the same situation, may I suggest that you extend the same grace to yourself? May I suggest that you extend the same love to yourself? May I suggest that you extend the same amount of mercy and the same amount of compassion to yourself? So do a self-examination in love. To ask yourself, am I being irrational here? Ask yourself, do I just feel like I was not in control? Learn how to ask yourself these things. And then say, well, what would I say to somebody else if they came to me with the same set of circumstances? I'd handle them with love. So guess what? Learn how to handle yourself with love. Not as a clinician, just things that I've learned. And then something else that you may want to do in terms of processing and handling the shoulda, couldas, and wouldas in life, it's what I call that for every con, find a pro. You know, sometimes people say you have to balance the pros and the cons. And here's what I would recommend. For every con, make sure that you find a pro. Cutler, what do you mean? I mean that for every thought of guilt that you have, learn to find a positive thought. For every con, every negative thought that deals with guilt, learn to find a pro, learn to find a positive con. Can you offer us some examples? Of course, you know I can offer examples. You say something like, I should have been there. That's a con. That's a thought that comes from a place of guilt. Learn how to balance that with some of the pros. I should have been there. Guess what? That was one time that you weren't there. But you were there 101 times. For every con, find a pro. I should have been there that one time. You were there 101 times. Don't do that to yourself. I should have got him that pair of shoes. You didn't get him that pair, but you got him 37 other pair. I just hope I'm helping somebody. I should have told him. I should have told her that I love her. Chances are your actions spoke more than your mouth. And he knew you loved him. She knew you loved her. Find the positive, find the positive, find the pro for every one of those cons. If only, if I had only known, then I could have fill in the blank. Find a pro for that con. You didn't know. And you don't want to make other people rich by enrolling in a bogus class called How to Tell the Future. If I would have known, we are not all knowing. We are limited as intellectual and as intelligent as we are limited in our knowledge. If only I knew, I could have. You didn't know. We can't tell the future. And I said for what? For every con, find a pro. For confusion, for condemnation, for conflict, you got to find a pro. And guess what, y'all? Sometimes the pro is a professional therapist, a professional counselor, a professional clinician. So for every pro, for every con that we sometimes deal with, find a pro. Anybody else other than me just have to deal with the coulda? Have you ever dealt with the coulda, shouldas, and wouldas? I mean, you've lost people and then you dealt with that self-imposed guilt. Things have happened to people that you couldn't necessarily control. Self-imposed guilt. I could have done this. I should have done that. I wish I would have. And then here's another way. Thank you, my friend Sinket. I see that. Thank you. And then what about this, you all? Forgive yourself in terms of handling the guilt. What about this? Learn how to forgive yourself. And I know that's easier said than done. I know it's difficult. Coulda, if you know it's difficult, then why do people get on YouTube and always say, forgive yourself? May I tell you what I mean when I say it? May I tell you what it means for me to forgive yourself? To forgive yourself, it means this. It means I may have some regrets, but I'm still moving forward. That's what it means for me. It doesn't mean everything that happened was okay. It doesn't mean everything that happened was all right. It doesn't mean that I'm okay with everything that happened. It means that I may have some regrets, but I'm still moving forward. That's what forgive yourself means to me. That I'm moving forward. Some things I could have done differently. But because I did not get a chance to do them differently, there are some lessons that I learned out of my space and my place of guilt. So Cutler, what would you suggest? What do you offer that I do? I could have done some things differently. May I suggest this? Share your story. Because out of not having done them differently, what happened is that you learned a lesson in that space of guilt, in that space of dealing with whatever happened. You learned something. How do you then handle it? Pay it forward. Share your story. Share your experience. Don't be selfish about what you learned from your space of guilt. Forgiving yourself is so difficult, and people will sometimes try to conceptualize what it means. It means I've got to make myself all right with what happened. Absolutely not. I don't have to be all right with what happened. I wasn't there when she died, and I'm not all right with it. I wish I would have done more, and I'm not all right with it. So then, in your space of guilt, take what you learned. Sinket asks a very pertinent question. The question that she says is, what if you are too embarrassed to share your story? You know what I would say? Share it anonymously. Even if you have to take it and create, I don't want to say a false narrative, but you can say, you know what? I know somebody who dealt with something similar. So either you can share it anonymously and you can say, I know someone who dealt with a similar situation that you're going through. Now, Sinclair, unless they're watching this broadcast, and I'm gonna talk like I do, because y'all know I'm from the South, I'm gonna talk like I do down in the country. Unless they're watching this broadcast, they ain't got to know that there's somebody that you're talking about is you. You just say, I know somebody who went through a similar situation. And this is what they did. This is what they would probably say. They ain't got to know that that somebody is you, but share your story. And then if life is so gracious, again, that opportunity may come back around and you can say, you know what, I didn't get a chance to do it right the first time. I didn't learn it. I didn't know the lesson. We don't always get it right the first time. But what you can say is, I may not have gotten it right the first time, but life has been gracious enough to deal me that card again. And guess what? This time I'll play it and I'll win the hand. I'll play it and I'll win the game. This is how we handle the couldas and the shouldas and the wouldas. And the only other piece that I have to offer us tonight in terms of how to handle the couldas and the shouldas and the wouldas and the self-imposed guilt is this, you all. Is this. Please hear this from my heart. Learn how to speak to yourself through their voice. You lost a loved one, learn how to speak to yourself through their voice. Cutler, why would you say that? I say that because if it is truly a loved one, they would speak to you in love. And here is our challenge tonight. Here's where I challenge us. If it's truly a loved one, they would speak to you in love. Here comes the challenge. If you would listen to them in life, then hear them in their death. If you would have listened to them in life, then please hear them in their death. Cutler, what do you mean? Live with the love that they would give you and not with the guilt that you would give yourself. Live with the love that they would give you and not with the guilt that we sometimes give ourselves. We say things like this, but do we mean it? They would want me to do so and so. They would want me to move on. They would want me to keep moving forward. And we know what they would say. We know what they would say out of love. So if you would listen to them in life, hear them in their death, move forward with the love that they give and not the guilt that we give ourselves. I hope this is helping somebody. This is how you tackle the couldas and the shouldas and the wouldas. Please invite somebody to catch the replay. Please invite somebody to come back and hear this. Because we live through this stuff. This is real. We talk about how to handle the most intense moments of life. This is how we handle them. We have real conversations about real conversations about real things that go on in life. I only have this to offer us as I close. Because to summarize it all, we end up asking ourselves these questions. One, we say, did I say or do enough? We end up asking ourselves, did I make the right decision? Mama is gone, daddy is gone, my sister is gone, my brother is gone, my husband is gone, my wife is gone. Did I make the right decision? We ask ourselves, am I a bad person? This was beyond my control. I didn't do anything about it. I couldn't have done anything about it. Am I a bad person? Those three questions, did I say or do enough? Yes, you did. This is what I come tonight with as my offering. I offer us the power to receive the answers to these questions that will free us. Did I say or do enough? Yes, you did. Because many times what you said was not only with your mouth, but you said it with your actions, with your deeds, with all of that stuff. Did I make the right decisions? Absolutely. Given the totality of the circumstances, given the fullness of what was going on, you made the right decision. because you made a decision based on the cards that were in your hand. You don't know what was in anybody else's hand. You don't know what was in the rest of the deck, but you made a decision based on the cards that you had to play in your hand. Am I a bad person? Absolutely not. You are a human being. You are a human being who does not have the power to see into the future. You're a human being who does not know anybody else's time on this earth. You are a human being fraught with frailties and human flaws who can only say, looking back, being able to reflect, it's 2020, but it's not quite so clear when I'm looking forward. I'll offer us the power to receive the answers to these questions that will free us. Did I say or do enough? Yes, you did. Did I make the right decision with the cards that you had to play? Absolutely, yes, you did. Am I a bad person? Absolutely not. You are a human person. And again, Cutler, why would you have this conversation? I had this conversation because I've spoken with a friend who lost a son and had to deal with the coulda, shoulda, woulda. Have a friend who was on vacation, her mother died, and she dealt with the coulda, shouldas, and wouldas. Had a friend who said to his mom, I'll see you next weekend, and next weekend, by the time next weekend came, she was gone. Why? Because I know a husband who felt that he didn't do enough. He didn't insist that his wife get this kind of treatment when she'd already said no. Real life, real situations, real circumstances. Tell people, come on, let's talk to color. These are some heavy things, but they're real life things. I trust that you have been empowered somehow. And if it doesn't pertain to you, I trust that you've been empowered with something that you can share with somebody else. Do me a favor, you all. Let's keep building community. Let's keep maintaining connectivity. You all stay safe and stay sane. Keep your heads up. Keep your hopes up. Know that from my heart to yours, there is and always will be so much love. And my goal is that every time I show up, to show up with something that helps us to show up better tomorrow than we did today. All right. You all take care. Yes, this was good. Do you mind holding up your book again? Absolutely. Hey, hang on, Sinket. I'll do it. In fact, I'll hold up several of them, but the one that I held up tonight was this one. Hang on. This one was called We Don't Always Get It Right the First Time, Lessons for the Next Generation. All right, that's one. Then there's another one that is called When I Am Overwhelmed, How to Handle Life at Its Most Intense Moments, like death, like dealing with grief. Several others. The problem with believing God, not the problem with God, but the problem with believing God. This one, Billboards to Better, 366 daily sources of motivation and inspiration. And they all are out there. Let me just post my website. Okay, are these all available on Amazon? Yes, they are. They're on Amazon. Go to Amazon and just search Gregory Brad Cutler, and you'll find my books. They'll come up, and there you have it. All right. I'm so thankful for this time of sharing, for this conversation. I trust that we are all empowered to help somebody else. Even if we are not dealing with the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, I trust that we are empowered to help somebody else. You all take care and listen. I'll be here Thursday, 8:00 Eastern Standard Time. I'm just trying to help save your life. Until then, tell somebody. Come on, let's talk to Cutler. Good night, everybody.